What happens when two bass road warriors spend quality time talking music and life with one of their peers? Bassist, educator, author David C. Gross and bassist and head honcho of KnowYourBassPlayer.com, Tom Semioli, trade dates with the legends of rock, jazz, funk, blues, folk, country, and more. Notes from an Artist, revealing conversations with the legends who've created the soundtrack of our lives. What happens? You're about to find out. It's another episode of Notes from an Artist.
Tonight, we're going to be doing a part 2 of the Marc Myers interview. A few weeks ago, you listened to part 1, so we decided that there's a lot of great info here. We could throw a lot of great music in.
The book is called Rock Concert and Oral History as Told by the Artists, Backstage Insiders, and Fans Who Were There. You can get it in hard copy. You can get it in Kindle. You can get it on various ebooks. It is all about the evolution of rock through live performances. And as you say, Marc did fabulous interviews with musicians, promoters, stagehands, and fans. If you wish you were there, this is the closest you're going to get. Marc has also authored several books, Anatomy of a Song, Why Jazz Happened. His www.jazzwax.com is the best jazz website out there with lots of topics we discuss in this interview. We talk about how technology made the concert experience a lot different, right, with wireless guitars. We discuss the Stones at Altamont, the various free concerts, Arthur Brown and Screamin' Jay Hawkins, who was the first shock rocker. Lots of interesting topics with Marc.
So here we go.
Also mention, I guess, even though it's not thought of a concert, is Martin Luther's 63 speech at the Capitol. That's when Dylan invented rock without the row.
No, those are two separate events.
Is that my mistake? Okay.
Yeah, that's okay. It's a big book. I mean, as readers will, Tom, you can attest to this. I mean, there's a lot in there, but that thing reads like a dart. You go through that thing and it's like, It flies. I mean, that book does not bog down on stuff you don't want to know about. Right. So it doesn't bog down on anything. It just moves like the wind. The two Dylan events there, the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. delivers the I Have a Dream speech, had a performance component to sort of warm up the crowd or just make the crowd feel kinder, more loving. And there were folk artists and there were gospel artists. But what I zoom in on in that particular event is that for the first time, very first time, you have Bob Dylan, you have Joan Baez, you have Peter, Paul, and Mary. In particular, on the pop side, you have these people not only performing to 250,000 people. I mean, the crowd goes to the horizon. If you look at those photos, goes way deep into toward the Washington Monument. You can't even see the end of the crowd.
I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. Exalted. And every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children be able to sing with new meaning, my country, tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring when the capital. When we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at.
For the first time, you're seeing photographs, other rock artists, other promoters, other venue, all of the people who were involved in the concert business back then, that nascent concert business that really hasn't evolved yet. But they're all looking and seeing this crowd and Dylan playing to this crowd and Peter, Paul, and Mary playing to this crowd. And it suddenly the light bulb goes off over everybody's head that this is a lot bigger than we thought it was.
Right.
That we actually could get a lot more people to these kinds of events.
You were just listening to Peter, Paul, and Mary doing the Bob Dylan classic Blowing in the Wind. And after that, you heard Pawn in the Game by Bob Dylan. Both pieces were played at March on Washington, 1963. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
And why don't we give it a shot, which, of course, leads to the Beatles at Shea, first and foremost.
That is a rare YouTube video of the Beatles at Shea Stadium. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
The other event you're talking about, of course, is the Newport Folk Festival in 1965, where Dylan goes electric. And what happens there, which I thought was, you touched on this, Tom, which was amazing. He really does, at the end of that concert, whether you think people are booing or not, which is sort of, people go back and forth over whether they can hear booing because they're playing electric or they're not. From my interviews, my guess is that many were outraged, not so much because he went electric, but because the music was so damn loud. All the guys on stage, as you recall in my book, cranked their amps up and they overshot the mix board that was down in the audience. The mix board was set to a certain level based on a sound check, and these guys blew through it. And there's a lot of distortion and a lot of noise. So the audience was reacting to that at the end.
That was Bob Dylan, like a Rolling Stone, live at the Newport Folk Festival, 1965. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
But what happens there at the end, I think Joe Boyd says this in the book, that Dylan that night invented rock without the roll. That suddenly the roll part was out, and you had this new thing called rock, which meant singer-songwriters and people who were performing, writing their own material, and that material often was observational.
And exactly. The sound systems weren't sophisticated in those days to handle a rock concert. It's interesting. I've spoken with Max Weinberg and Clarence Clemens.
Great guy, Max.
Yeah. We hope to get him on the show and to do some of our live gigs, David. How actually playing in an arena changes the way you play your instrument. It's not the same as playing drums in a club is a lot different than playing in Madison Square Garden. You have to simplify your technique to play fewer notes in Clarence Clemens's situation. I remember when I was studying music at the University of Miami, the jazz players weren't very enamored with Clarence. And this is going back to 1980 when Bruce really broke because he wasn't playing a lot of notes like their heroes, David Sanborn or Charlie Parker or Sonny Stitt and things like that. Well, when you're playing in an open arena to 50,000 people, you can't play a bebop solo. You have to play something very linear, very melodic.
That was Bruce Springsteen with Clarence Clemens doing Sherry Darling live. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
So it also changed the way a lot of musicians played. I mean, you listen to someone like Bruce Springsteen, especially a record like Born to Run, that was meant to be played in a large venue, that record.
That was Bruce Springsteen doing Born to Run. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
Yeah, I mean, as I say in my book, Rock Concert, a lot changes when the music goes indoors. In addition to the volume getting turned up indoors, and in addition to more sophisticated lighting systems indoors, you also had, the onus was on you as a rock artist or a rock band to create something visual. In other words, there's only so much static. For a time, people watched bands just stand around on stage. But you eventually had to get visual. And the device that allowed rock artists, guitarists, and bass players to move around on stage wirelessly was an incredibly important invention. That Schaefer Vega pack that went on their backs. A little cigarette-sized pack that went on their backs, because now you weren't getting tangled up in the wires. Now you could run around. I mean, without that wireless device, AC/DC probably would have been, they would be like running a hardware store in Australia today. Angus Young would not have been able to run around the way he did with his guitar if he weren't wireless.
That was AC/DC, Highway to Hell, live at River Plate. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
The arena forces a lot of things to change, and the bands that acclimated and bands that made those changes and they became more visual. One of the most interesting stories I found in the book in writing it was Chip Monk's description of how, I asked him, how did you light light the Stones, because I know
every
that
band member had a color, right? And that's what he says?
Yeah, and every song had a different mood. And Mick was in gold, and then Keith would be in violet. He had this scheme, this color scheme, and the scheme was interesting. I said to him, was this how you felt about them? Is that what you were doing? And he goes, well, that has something to do with it, but I was really trying to light them theatrically, meaning I wanted the audience to feel something about these guys when I lit them in a certain way, so that if Mick is in gold, they're singing Satisfaction, and Mick is in gold, that they feel he's satisfied. Or, if they're singing a different song and they're lit blue, that kind of meant that they were bummed out. There was emotional reasoning for the lighting that he was using. And of course, he's the pioneer of concert lighting.
That was Midnight Rambler, the Rolling Stones, live, 1972. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
Of course, I remember the effect that Alice Cooper had on rock acts because they had to up their game. Visuals became a very important component of a rock concert. You had to see a show.
Shock rock or theater rock, drama rock really comes into its own in about 1970.
Right.
And that's the godfather of shock rock, a visual, dramatic, theatrical rock performance where there's a rock show going on, but there's sort of drama going on, a theatrical performance going on at the same time. The godfather of that is Fire. Arthur Brown.
Yeah, Arthur Brown, sure.
That was the crazy world of Arthur Brown doing Fire. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
Mark, if you think about it, it's really Screaming Jay Hawkins.
Yes, from a blues perspective.
That was the great Screaming Jay Hawkins doing I Put a Spell on You. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
You can go back before that, but I'm saying where it hits hard rock, where it becomes much, much darker, much more ominous, because Screaming Jay was, there was a lot of humor in that, and there was a lot of tongue-in-cheek in that, right? But Alice Cooper, it's tongue-in-cheek, but it's not, right? It's
sinister.
It's sinister. That's a great word. That's a great word for it. It's sinister.
That was Welcome to My Nightmare, Alice Cooper. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
Arthur Brown got a crown on his head that's on fire, and he's singing a song called Fire. And the audience this is 1968.
Yeah.
The audience is in Paris where he begins. They're going nuts. I mean, they love this stuff. It's European in so many ways. And when it comes here in 68, it becomes a big chart topper. And anybody who is of that mind took notice, and Alice Cooper did take notice.
Yeah, I'm sure he was. Yeah, absolutely. He was definitely a student of Arthur Brown.
Hey, by the way, how did you like that story I had in there of how Alice Cooper wound up with the eye makeup?
Oh, what was that? Go repeat that for me. I can't recall.
Or maybe coming in my next book. I've got a story on that. I'm not going to spoil it.
Preview.
I'm not going to spoil it. No, I'm not going to spoil it.
Oh.
All right, here you go. They were staying in New York across from a theater. And on the theater poster was sort of one of these clowns with makeup. It was like a operatic sort of clown sort of thing. And, one of the guys in the band looks out the window and says, hey, we ought to do that. And they ran off to like one of these Sephora's or one of these cosmetic stores down the block
and
brought back the makeup and put it on Alice Cooper's eyes. And then from there, he was wearing makeup. But it's a great story. It's coming in my next, I've got my next Anatomy of a Songbook coming in November.
Oh, okay.
Which is called Anatomy of 55 More Songs.
All right, good. See that? Plug the book. Plug the future book.
And I think if you're talking about...
Plug what people can't buy.
If you're talking about the clown, I think that might be Pagliacci, the opera.
Wow, those basses at the end really kill it. But that was the great Enrico Caruso doing Pagliacci. And this is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
It wasn't that specifically. I'd have to dip into that. I'd have to dip into my interview with Alice Cooper to tell you exactly what that poster was, because I actually found the playbill. I found the poster. I found what they were looking at. So that's in there too. But Arthur Brown, Alice Cooper, Iggy, that whole scene where the stage becomes this theatrical theatrical thing, you suddenly have a visual. And if there's a visual, it becomes a whole lot more interesting. As Cirque du Soleil knows, it becomes a lot more interesting, and people will pay a lot more money than if they're just watching four people stand on stage looking at their instruments as they're playing.
That was the Stooges, Iggy Pop doing Search and Destroy. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
Another revolution you mentioned, and David, you probably stood online to get concert tickets, but I came along in the 1970s and we had a thing called Ticketmaster and Ticketron, and just how that...
Isn't that a great section? I mean, that is such a great section of the book. It's just really, it's so fascinating to know how tickets, I mean, if you remember the 1969 Altamont, the events leading up to Altamont.
Okay.
And if you go onto YouTube and you type in 1969 American Tour, the Rolling Stones, you'll see that Mick Jagger and the Stones were getting hounded by the media, by the press. And what they were asking him, what they were shouting out constantly is, Mick, this is your tour here. Are you going to play a free concert? Are you going to play a free concert here? The only way that you were taken seriously at that point in time in 69 is if you were going to do something for free.
Right.
And it wasn't for charity. It wasn't like all the money was going to a charitable event. It was that the audiences that came felt they deserved to have music played for free. There was this mindset in the hippie youth culture that we'll buy your albums, we'll be responsible for getting you your Porsches, Janice, and we'll be responsible for getting your Rolls Royce, Neil Young, and we'll be responsible for getting you your great homes in Laurel Canyon, guys. We'll pay for those albums, but when you're playing live, that's a treat for us. That's going to be a treat for us because you're thankful that we did that for you. Today, it sounds ludicrous. It sounds absurd. That was the hippie ethos. That was the mindset. Need to play a live concert. If you're going to be one of us, says the audience, then a live concert will do that. And the Stones didn't want to play a live concert. They were practically broke, virtually bankrupt at this point in time because everything cost them so much money and they just weren't having the kinds of monumental success that they would years later. They're just, Mick, you're going to play live. Are you going to play the Altamont concert? Is that going to be live? Are you going to play live there? And they finally gave in and they played live, and we know what happened.
What a nightmare. The Stones at Altamont. That was Sympathy for the Devil, and that gave you a little insight into what exactly was going on during that show. Just horrible. Just tragic. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
So years later, if you fast forward, for the most part, concert prices are reasonable through the years. I mean, $5 here, maybe they went to $20. Live Aid was $35. But once you get Ticketron, once that thing is clicking on all cylinders, business realizes that the rock concert is a valuable thing. And the business people who are running computerized ticketing are saying to themselves, why is it that people pay $200 for a football game? Let's not say $200. It's a little high for that point in time. But why are people paying $150 for a professional football game? Why are they paying $150 for a Broadway ticket? But David Bowie and Elton John or chopped liver, like they should be $5 and $10?
That's right.
They're the same thing. And to be fair, if it wasn't for those high prices, the record business shot itself in the head in the digital age, right?
Oh, absolutely.
There's no money in records today. There's no money in albums. They're lost leaders. I mean, artists basically give it away to YouTube with hopes that you'll love it and and then pay $200 to go to the concert.
Right.
I mean, everything is in the live. This is why the pandemic is so tragic for music, because the artists, the rock artists, the pop artists, all of the artists, this is where they make their money today, which is on tour. Touring is not glamorous, as I point out in the book and as you can see in the book. It is hard work. You don't feel well that night? Tough luck. There's 55,000 people waiting for you down the block. Your hand hurts? Suck it up. Put on your big boy pants because, you got a concert to do. And there's pounding of the knees. There's hand soreness. There's, neck soreness. It is hard to tour. And some of these bands were touring 200 days a year, 250 days a year.
Well, you have to pay the bills. I mean, let's face it, Dave, we were talking about this just with the whole thing with streaming. For a band to break even, you've got to do 3-4 shows a week.
Yeah. So I don't want to hear about it when people cry that the tickets are like $300 or $200. That's the same thing you'd spend on a sports event and probably the same thing you'd spend on a Broadway show. So the reality is these events are getting to see art and you're getting to see it live, and the technology today allows you to see it on big screens.
That was Rock Show, Paul McCartney and Wing. This is Notes from an Artist on cygnusradio.com.
And what's more, you'll soon be able to see it streaming, because that's where the industry is going, as we started out talking about.
We were talking to our publicist yesterday afternoon, told us about something called Wisdom. And it's a dome that's completely, artificial intelligence inside. It's an immersive experience. They have them for 100 people, for 600 people, and larger, they're going to have actual parks. So conceivably, since the charity that we work with and do our events for is the WHO's charity, Teen Cancer America, it would make sense for the charity to either buy or rent one of these domes, play Who music.
You get the irony in what you just said, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely.
Who's Next? Pete Townshend's whole concept for Who's Next was this dome, was this full immersed experience. I mean, it's so ironic that the Who's who's involved with this, because Pete is all about this. I mean, if you look at my piece in the Wall Street Journal on Who's Next, which ran in September, the anniversary,
50 years,
Pete's whole concept for this was completely about surrealistic, futuristic opera, about how the world is so polluted, people have to stay at home,
right?
And they're plugged in. They're plugged
Lifehouse, in. Right? Wasn't that?
Yeah, that's correct. That's exactly right. Yeah.
That was the Who doing Teenage Wasteland from Who's Next, which Marc was talking about in terms of the Lifehouse sessions. We should do a show on the Lifehouse sessions, Tom. I think that would be a great idea. This is Notes from an Artist on cygnusradio.com.
Well, now look at what we've morphed to what the concert has become. Of course, another major event, major change in the concert business was the Jumbotron, the big screen. And then I say to myself, I think the first time I saw the Jumbotron was in '89 with the Rolling Stones, although I think Live Aid had them. At this point, is it really a concert now? Is this really I'm sitting in a stadium with 80,000 people and I'm looking at a screen?
The rock concert, the concert itself goes back. This is how I open my book. The live music event goes back 3,000 years BC. They found tablets that show that there was a live event, a live music event. There is something palpable and magical about any large group of people listening to one person perform or a band perform. And a large event like that unifies people. It makes you feel less weird because there are other people like you there. It puts you together with a universe of people who share the same values that you do, because you're all enjoying the same group. Obviously, if you're all there, you're all loving the group. That's why when you go to concerts, people are constantly talking gossip about the band, or I read this about the band, or before the music starts, the people next to you, everybody becomes friends instantly. It's very rare that you go to a concert. My first concert was Santana in 1971 at the Felt Forum. As soon as you got in there, it's like the joints were being passed, right? And people were talking, what school do you go to? And, where do you live? And my teacher's an asshole, and so is mine. And everybody had the same values. You realized everybody hated the same people. Everybody loved the same people. Everybody looked the same. The women all had aviators and halters and tight jeans and clogs, and the guys were all wearing fringy Daniel Boone kind of jackets. I mean, everybody dressed the same. Everybody thought the same. And for the first time, you're exposed to a culture that isn't your parents and gin and tonic and bridge games and meatloaf and casseroles, right?
Just another brick in the wall. Pink Floyd. This is Notes from an Artist on cygnusradio.com.
Listen, the other thing is, I don't know about you guys, I'm sure it was the same, but the thing about the rock concert is your first concert, you went in adolescent and you came out a young adult. You suddenly you felt like you could make your own decisions, that you could challenge your parents, that the other people were just like you and they did the same thing in their houses and felt the same way. And why should you have to do it that way? And you were suddenly challenging everything when you came out of those concerts.
Right, because it validated your generation. Now, how do you feel? I know I was shocked the first time I started seeing parents and their kids going to rock concerts. Now, I think it was the one that really hit me. I was at the 97 Bowie 50th birthday party, which in those days, David, 50 was old. You know that. And there was a mother-daughter, and they both had their Ziggy Stardust T-shirts on. And I remember
that's just wrong. I'm sorry. That's wrong. That's wrong.
Let me take the other point. Let me take the other point of view here for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
The kids today should feel sorry, really, because they were robbed, in addition to being robbed with COVID terribly, culturally. They were robbed in that they did not have the kind of music we did. They did not have music with lyrics. They did not have music where you sat and watched your speakers while the music played. Everything was background music. And as they grew up, my daughter's 32, and she loves original vinyl of classic rock. Part of this reason is she sat at my feet while I worked in my home office, growing up, and she was listening to everything I was listening to as I was writing about it. But it's also because it's simple to understand and it's emotive music, and you can sing along to it, and the words are kind of interesting, and they don't have that. So they had to reach back one or two stations to get the music. And I'll bet you when you saw that mother and daughter with the Ziggy T-shirts, I'm going to bet that daughter knew more about Bowie than her mother did.
As a caveat, I have a 17-year-old daughter. I have a 37-year-old son, but I have a 17-year-old daughter. And yes, he has Hendrix tattooed on his shoulder, and my daughter listens to, well, they are lyrics. I guess you'd call them lyrics, but it's an entirely different situation. No, and I agree with you. And of course, the last 2 years, while she was sitting in the house, not being able to go to school, not to be with her friends and such, it adds to the misery.
And ask her why. And a 30-year-old is very different than a 17-year-old, because a 17-year-old is still coming together. There's things that they're very influenced by friends. It's what they're listening to while they're experiencing certain things through a rites of passage in high school and so on. So it's a different scene. When your son gets to be 30-something, he's not going to be listening to the stuff he's listening to now for nostalgia. He's going to be listening to Steely Dan. He's going to discover all of this music that his older sister has. And if you ask her why she listens to the music, her answer is going to be very interesting. Her answer sure is going to be something like, well, you guys listen to it in the car, and that's where I heard it. Or, reminds me of mom, or I listen to it because I can understand the lyrics, or I like to sing along to the music, or the music meant something back then. People were protesting something back then. You guys were changing the world, and that this music was about, Joni Mitchell was singing about women coming of age, and the Beach Boys were singing about, suddenly the beach was a youth place where young people went, not where uncles and aunts took their little kids. And, I remember going to the beach when I was a little kid. My uncle would be on the beach with like plaid shorts on, socks, black socks up to his knees, and shoes.
David does that now, but go ahead.
That's it. Yeah, they have to keep me inside, And I wear the pants up to here. So
that's it. That's it. So the beach music revolution, that beach as a place of sexuality, of youth culture, of coming of age, of first kiss, of cars, that transforms. The Beach Boys transform all of that, popularize that.
That was the Beach Boys doing Surfin' USA. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
Well, Mark, thanks for talking to us. We'll link.
Great having me, guys. It was a joy. Right. I'm glad we could finally get this together. I really appreciate it.
Fantastic book. We're big Jazz Wax fans. We'll let you know when this airs, and we'll send you all the podcast stuff, and we'll keep you posted on our shows.
Tom, Dave, thanks for having me.
All right. Good to see you.
All right.
Okay. Adios.
See ya.
What a great part 2. I want to thank our guest, Marc Myers, and of course, my partner in crime, Tom Semielli, for another fabulous, informative interview. I would encourage all of you to go out and pick up a copy of Marc's new and fantastic book, Rock Concert, an oral history as told by the artists, backstage insiders, and fans who were there. Keep Spotify, Google, or YouTube, whatever you got handy, because you will want to go through the concerts that are mentioned in the book. I would also encourage you, if you've missed any of our previous shows or want to listen again, particularly to part 1 of this one, we invite you to our podcast, also titled Notes from an Artist, which you can find on all major podcast players or at notesfromanartist.buzzsprout.com. This is David Gross for Tom Semioli and Marc Myers. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week, where our guest will be John Altman, who has just released his memoirs, Hidden Man. We'll see you then. Have a great week.
To all you Notes from an Artist listeners on our podcast, on our radio show, on our video series. David, do we have any other platforms that I'm not aware of?
Yes, we're on Pornhub.com.
On Pornhub, yes, we are. And Hustler Magazine and Jugs and all those great publications. On Wednesday, March 30th, 2022, at the bitter end, Notes from an Artist Live presents an evening of Free Pie, which is the music of Humble Pie and Free. David, why did we choose those two artists to tribute this time?
It's some of the greatest music of all time. Outside of All Right Now, Free, all of their songs had a real serious blues bass. Paul Rogers, what a great singer. And then, of course, you have Humble Pie, Steve Marriott. I mean, where you go from there?
Okay, everybody, so make sure you're at the bitter end on Wednesday, March 30th. Notes from an Artist Live. Our program is going to be an evening of Free Pie, the music of Humble Pie and Free. Our featured singers are going to be Shannon Connolly, who you know from Hedwig and the Angry Inch, and Les Zeppelin. The amazing Joey Kelly of Joey Kelly and the All-Stars, Chris Barato and Troy Weeks with our friends Mark Bosch from the Ian Hunter Band and Martha Hoople and Garland Jeffries. You have Dave Donut on drums from the Lenny K Connection and Frank Carrillo. John Kalana on keyboards. He is of the John Kalana Quartet.
We're doing 2 sets from 8 to 10. It's going to be a great show. Reserve your seats. Come on out.